Starfleet, we have been told time and time again, is not a military organization. It's a service dedicated to science, exploration, and diplomacy. As Captain Pike says in the first Kelvin timeline film, it's a peacekeeping and humanitarian armada. Even so, it's got a lot of military shit attached to it, doesn't it? I mean, when the Federation goes to war, it's not some other organization that fights, it's Starfleet. And more basically than that, it's got uniforms, divisions, ranks. It's definitely military-ish. It's also got the chain of command, the bane of Star Trek protagonists since the days of Captain Kirk. Part of being a Starfleet officer is following orders. If you're a higher-ranking officer, say the captain of a starship, you get to mostly give orders, but captains still have to take orders too. And the heroes of Star Trek shows, they don't like that so much. Which compels me to ask, does Star Trek actually believe in the chain of command? Note that I'm asking if Star Trek believes in the chain of command, not Starfleet. Obviously, Starfleet believes in it. But when we watch the many series and films that comprise the Star Trek canon, they lead us to a different conclusion, and that conclusion is important above and beyond the fun, nerdy conversations we can have on the way to reaching it, because the answer to the question in the title of this video is part of what Star Trek is trying to tell us. So let's figure out what this is by having a fun, nerdy conversation. I'll go first. The captain disobeying a direct order from their superiors has been a part of some of Star Trek's most memorable episodes. It's one of the most commonly used tropes throughout the franchise, right up there with time travel, alternate realities, and the holodeck going haywire and trying to kill the people in it. And that makes sense, right? Action-adventure shows like Star Trek rely on conflict to create drama, and putting your hero in a situation where they have to choose between what they've been ordered to do and what they think they should do is a tried and true way to generate compelling conflict and to reveal character, which is always nice, especially on shows where long-term character development is often extremely minimal, which, let's be honest, describes a lot of Star Trek. Captain Kirk has a rep as an inveterate disobeyer of orders. When he's on trial in Star Trek VI, General Chang even lists insubordination as one of Kirk's defining traits. Granted, Chang has an axe to grind there, so his characterization might not be the most reliable, but earlier in that same film, we get a scene of Kirk casually ignoring a regulation that forbids starships from leaving space dock under impulse power. Lieutenant Valeris reminds him, "Sir, we're only supposed to use thrusters while in space dock?" And Kirk's like, "Whatever, you heard me." He's such a maverick, he won't even follow the speed limit in space dock. Or, given that this is the final film for the classic cast, maybe he's just old and contrary and doesn't give a shit. Like William Shatner in real life. It's not an excuse. Much like Kirk's reputation as a womanizer, which I made a video about a couple of years ago, I find his reputation as a devil-may-care rule breaker to be a bit overstated. Kirk is a lot more by the book than a lot of folks might assume, which is not to say he never disregards the chain of command. He definitely does. Not all that often, but when he does, he makes it count. In my favorite episode of classic Star Trek, Amok Time, Kirk is faced with one of those follow orders or do what he knows is right dilemmas when Spock starts acting like an abusive jerk, and it turns out it's because he really needs to go back to his home planet so he can get laid. And Kirk turns to Dr. McCoy like, "For real?" And McCoy says, "No, for real. If he's not back on Vulcan given skins in like a week, he'll die." The problem is, Kirk's been ordered by Starfleet to take the Enterprise to Altair 6 for the inauguration ceremony of the planet's new president, which is, like, super important for diplomacy or whatever. And if he does that, Spock won't make it to Vulcan in time to get that life-saving ass-waxing. Kirk knows that disobeying a direct order to go to Altair 6 could mean the end of his career, but when he teases the humiliating details out of Spock and realizes how serious it is, he orders the Enterprise to change course and make for Vulcan at the best possible speed. And then they get there, and Spock and Kirk have a fight to the death because it turns out Spock's wife-to-be has a scheme to either kill Spock or get him to break up with her so she can get down with this other guy, Ston, because it turns out she's just not that into Spock. Oh, and Spock never does get laid, but his life-threatening Pon-farr condition passes after he thinks he's killed Kirk in the fight because murdering someone in ritual combat and having sex are basically the same thing. Good to know, Star Trek. I'll add that one to the t-shirt. Kirk disobeys orders in Amok Time to save Spock's life. In the film Star Trek III: The Search for Spock, Kirk bucks the chain of command for a reason that is similar, but even more revealing of who Kirk is and how important Spock is to him. So Spock's dead and the Enterprise is on its way back to Earth following the events of Star Trek II, but Dr. McCoy is acting weird, and I don't mean got caught guzzling disinfectant in a supply closet after drinking his way through his liquor cabinet, again weird. I mean breaking into Spock's quarters and muttering about how he wants to go home to Vulcan, weird. Kirk realizes that maybe stuffing Spock's corpse into a torpedo and shooting it onto the Genesis planet wasn't the best idea in hindsight, so when they get back to Earth, he talks to an admiral about taking the Enterprise back. But the admiral says, "Oh, sorry, no, the Genesis thing is kind of a scandal now, so the whole planet is quarantined. Nobody can go there without permission, and you ain't got permission. Stay away from the Genesis planet, Jim. That's an order." And Kirk's like, okay, I guess we'll just steal the Enterprise and go anyway. Which is exactly what they do. But as they're about to take the Enterprise to warp, Captain Stiles of the USS Excelsior gets on the comm channel and says, "Kirk, if you do this, your career in Starfleet is over. You'll never sit in the captain's chair again." And without hesitating, Kirk gives Sulu the order for warp speed. Keep in mind that at this point, Kirk isn't necessarily thinking that Spock is going to come back to life. He's spoken with Sarek, who has told him that Spock has a Katra, an immortal spirit that must be taken back to Vulcan, but that doesn't necessarily translate to a bodily resurrection. They haven't been to Genesis yet. They don't know that the Genesis effect has revived Spock's body. Kirk isn't doing this to bring his friend back. He's doing this to honor him, to allow him to find peace, to collect his remains, and return them along with his soul to the place where his culture says he belongs. And he's doing it to help McCoy, who is carrying Spock's Katra and not loving it. For his friends, his chosen family, really, Kirk is willing to give up everything. His character arc in the movies up to this point has been centered on the captain's chair. In Star Trek the Motion Picture, he politics to get command of the Enterprise ahead of Captain Decker for the mission to intercept V'ger. In Star Trek II, McCoy and Spock both tell him that giving up the captaincy to accept promotion to Admiral was a mistake, and it's obviously a decision Kirk himself regrets. And now, in his big moment of decision in Star Trek III, he takes the captain's chair, the center of his existence, the thing he has sought to regain all this time, and throws it away for good as far as he knows, because doing right by Spock and McCoy is even more important to him than that. It's a stirring moment of self-sacrifice and heroism, arguably Kirk's finest moment as a character. But it's not just him. Once they've secured the Enterprise, he gives Scotty, Sulu, and Chekhov the opportunity to leave because the ship has been reconfigured to run on autopilot. Kirk and McCoy are the only ones who really need to go, and there's no reason for the rest of them to endanger themselves any further. And they all ask to stay, because they also realize that helping Spock and McCoy is more important than following orders. They know that doing the right thing demands that they disobey their superiors. Captain Picard has the opposite reputation to that of Kirk. He's perceived as rigidly by the book, and for the most part that's fair. He's certainly much less of a space cowboy than Kirk, though, again, even Kirk is less than a space cowboy than Kirk if you pay attention. But even straight arrow Picard shows he's willing to blow off his orders if his conscience demands it loudly enough. Picard rarely, if ever, violates direct orders from superiors during the 7 seasons of TNG. In fact, TNG repeatedly shows us Picard feeling conflicted about following orders he finds morally questionable, which, again, is kind of the opposite of the stories told about Kirk in Amok Time and Star Trek III. In the 7th season episode, Journey's End, Picard is ordered by Starfleet to relocate a colony of people descended from Native Americans because their planet has been ceded to the Cardassians as part of a peace treaty. Picard is obviously troubled by this, but he's also willing to go through with it. He ultimately doesn't have to, but that's the writers of the episode letting him off the hook. Whereas with Kirk, the story was usually about disobeying orders in order to do the right thing, Picard was more often placed in a situation where he would obey orders that conflicted with his principles and then have to live with it. Most of Picard's violations of the chain of command during the TNG TV series come in the form of breaking the Prime Directive, which he does several times. He doesn't start disobeying direct orders from superiors until we get to the TNG movies, and he discovers his inner renegade. The movie Star Trek First Contact begins with Picard having a Borg nightmare. Then he wakes up and an admiral calls him and says, "Hey, if you just had a Borg nightmare, it's probably because the Borg are attacking again. Just thought you'd want to know." So Picard calls a staff meeting and everybody's like, "Great, let's take our brand new Enterprise," which they gave us as a reward for crashing the old one, I guess, to go and fight the Borg. And Picard's like, "Not so fast. Starfleet doesn't want us fighting the Borg. We've been ordered to patrol the neutral zone instead." Everybody's like, "Aw, but we wanted to get killed by the Borg." Later, Picard and Riker are talking, and Riker's like, "What's the deal with Starfleet not letting us fight the Borg?" And Picard says, "The thing is, because I was assimilated by the Borg a few years ago, they don't think I should be put in a situation where I would face them again." And Riker's like, "Okay, well, did you suggest that maybe I could take command of the Enterprise? I am the assistant captain." Assistant to the captain. What? Nothing, forget it. So then everybody's on the bridge, and Picard is listening to the rest of the fleet fight the Borg on the radio, and it's not going well at all. So Picard orders Lieutenant Hawk, the con officer, who's totally not there to be killed off to reestablish the threat posed by the villains to the main characters, to set course for Earth, where the Borg battle is happening. And Picard's like, "I'm about to violate our orders by going to Earth, so if any of you narcs have a problem with that, say something now so I can write down what a narc you are." And Data's like, "I think I speak for the entire crew when I say, snitches get stitches, sir." In the next movie, the extremely underrated Star Trek Insurrection, Picard violates orders from a superior officer again. Granted, this time the orders come from Admiral Dougherty, who it turns out is an evil admiral, but Dougherty's evil plan hinges on forcibly relocating a community of people, the Baku, from a planet, which is exactly the sort of thing Picard was going to follow orders to do in the TNG episode Journey's End I mentioned a few minutes ago. I guess he had a nice long think after that and decided that he was anti-forced relocation after all. Good for you, Jean-Luc. And just as in Star Trek III, the rest of Picard's crew violate the Admiral's orders right alongside him, even after he tells them they don't have to. In fact, Picard tries to sneak out to go help the Baku himself so the crew doesn't get in trouble, but they catch him as he's about to leave, and Picard orders them not to help him, but they disobey Picard's orders and help him anyway. That's some Inception-level nested order disobeying there. On a related but irrelevant note, I've always loved that Riker's stated justification for defying Picard's order is that Picard is in civilian clothes when he gives it. No uniform, no orders. That's not how it works. Wouldn't it be hilarious if it was, though? Romulans decloak and start attacking the Enterprise in the middle of the night while Picard is asleep, so he jumps out of bed and runs straight to the bridge and is like, "Shields up, Mr. Worf," and Worf just stands there staring at him like, "No way, man, I don't take orders from people wearing pajamas. You want to boss me around? You go put on a uniform that looks like pajamas." Anyway, there are other examples of captains and other officers disobeying orders from throughout Star Trek that I could cite. In Deep Space Nine's For the Uniform, Sisko ignores Starfleet's order to let Captain Sanders take over the hunt for the traitor and Maquis leader Michael Eddington, continuing to pursue Eddington aboard a badly damaged Defiant. Sisko eventually poisons the atmosphere of an inhabited planet in order to pressure Eddington into turning himself in, which... Okay, technically, nobody ordered Sisko not to poison a planet, but that's probably because nobody thought they had to? On TNG's The Pegasus, my main man Commander Riker eventually goes against the orders of Admiral Pressman to tell Captain Picard all about the secret and super illegal phasing cloaking device that Pressman has developed. In another classic TNG episode, the two-parter from Season 6 that's actually titled Chain of Command, so you knew I had to mention it eventually, Riker ignores Captain Jellicoe's order to change the Enterprise's duty schedule from 3 shifts to 4, and is generally insubordinate for most of the time Jellicoe is in charge. On Voyager's 30 Days, Tom Paris disobeys orders from Captain Janeway in order to try and protect a civilization's water supply from being polluted. In the film Star Trek Into Darkness, the Kelvin timeline version of Kirk disobeys orders from Admiral Marcus to assassinate Khan with a long-range photon torpedo. In the first episode of Star Trek Discovery, Michael Burnham not only disobeys her captain's orders, she knocks her captain out and attempts to preemptively attack Klingons because she thinks that's the best way to avoid an even larger conflict. Disobeying orders is just something Star Trek heroes do, in other words. And crucially, far more often than not, the characters who disobey orders, who buck the chain of command, are vindicated. This vindication is so common, in fact, that on the rare occasion when a character is actually punished by Starfleet for insubordination, Tom in Voyager and Michael in Discovery are the 2 foremost examples in my mind, it's as unexpected as seeing an Enar at the beach. In Amok Time, Kirk's defiance of orders doesn't end his career or result in any punishment at all. T'Pau, the revered Vulcan priestess who presided over Spock and Kirk's ritual combat, contacts Starfleet and obtains retroactive permission for Kirk to divert the Enterprise to Vulcan. In Star Trek III, Kirk loses the Enterprise, but succeeds in reuniting Spock's consciousness with his revived body. And in the next film, Star Trek IV, Kirk and his crew are rewarded for saving Earth from the whale probe by being assigned to a new Enterprise. Captain Picard's decision on Star Trek First Contact to violate orders and join the fight against the Borg turns out to be pretty important, since without Picard's Enterprise following the Borg back in time, they would surely have assimilated Earth in the past and prevented the Federation from ever existing. Picard's insubordination in Star Trek Insurrection isn't quite as consequential on a galactic level, but still, he saves the day and isn't punished for it after the fact. Riker disobeying Admiral Pressman to spill the beans about the phasing cloak in the Pegasus allows the crew to use the device to fly the Enterprise out of an asteroid, and while Riker's insubordination toward Captain Jellicoe in Chain of Command doesn't yield him any specific benefit, he's briefly relieved of duty when Jellicoe finally tires of his shit, in fact, he is ultimately vindicated when Jellicoe comes crawling back to ask him to pilot a shuttlecraft for a crucial mission. Even Sisko poisoning the atmosphere of a planet doesn't seem to earn him any sort of a reprimand from Starfleet. He captures Eddington, people living on the poisoned planet are evacuated to another planet, and that's kind of it. While we occasionally see officers punished or at least getting yelled at a little for violating the Prime Directive, we almost never see them suffering at all for disobeying direct orders from superior officers. When a Star Trek hero disregards the chain of command, it's always for a noble reason, and it almost always works in their favor. So, does Star Trek actually believe in the chain of command? I think the answer to that question is not completely. So what does that mean? What is Star Trek trying to say here? And why does it matter? One of the critiques of Star Trek from the left is that, for as progressive as it is about social issues, its heroes are still mostly officers in a quasi-military organization who serve to further the interests of a powerful interplanetary nation-state. It glorifies service in the armed forces and hierarchical authority, and usually presents the Federation as a sort of too-good-to-be-true benevolent empire. And I think those critiques are fair. To a point, the heroes of Star Trek are not rebels or revolutionaries, for the most part. They are agents of the state, defenders of the status quo, cogs in the machine, links in the chain of command, if you will. However, time and time again, since almost the beginning, the creators of Star Trek have chosen to tell stories about its heroes stepping outside of that chain because they found it impossible to do what was right or what was necessary while still inside it. And that says to me that while Star Trek genuinely believes in institutions like the Federation and Starfleet and views them as potential forces for good, it also wants us to know that the authority of those institutions needs to be questioned and even defied from time to time. Many Star Trek fans have disliked the way more recent entries in the franchise have portrayed Starfleet and the Federation as corrupt or at least easily corruptible. But even during the TOS and TNG eras, we got numerous stories where Starfleet or the Federation, for all their nobility and wisdom and benevolence, were shown to be obstacles to the heroes doing what they knew was the right thing. Whether we're talking about the occasionally mentioned but seldom seen authorities of classic Trek, the idealized beacons of science and freedom of TNG, or the morally compromised institutions we see in Star Trek Into Darkness and Star Trek Picard, one message about Starfleet and the Federation has always been consistent. They aren't perfect, and they shouldn't be trusted uncritically or obeyed unthinkingly. Here's the thing, it's totally reasonable to observe that Star Trek, while progressive for the most part, is not terribly radical in its politics. However, it's never claimed to be. Star Trek believes in institutions and tells us that we should believe in them too. It believes that government and agents of the government, including members of the military, or a service that is very much like the military, can be forces for good in the world, can solve problems, can help people. But it also takes time to remind us over and over again that our institutions aren't entitled to our trust and faith. They need to earn them by being fair and truthful and responsive to people's needs. Order is only good and hierarchy is only tolerable if they are just. If maintaining that order or respecting that hierarchy requires you to do the wrong thing or prevents you from doing the right thing, then it's permissible and sometimes even imperative for the authority of that institution to be defied. Star Trek does believe in the chain of command, but it also believes there are more important things. The future we see represented by the Federation is hopeful and exciting, and there are all sorts of obstacles we need to overcome before we can realize that future. But if we allow friendship, love, and doing what's right to take a backseat to mindless obedience, we'll never get there. Hey folks, hope you enjoyed this one. Keep watching because in a few minutes I'm going to let you know what the topic of next month's Regulation Trek Actually video is going to be. But before we get there, I want to give shout outs to some of my newest Patreon patrons, and their names are DJ Daybreaker, thank you DJ, My Sexy Slug, thank you My Sexy Slug, Graceful Goran, thank you Graceful Goran, Benjamin Rivera, thank you Benjamin, Kelly O'Hara, thank you Kelly, Cantor David, thank you Cantor David, Brandon Gibbs, thank you Brandon, Stefan, thank you Stefan, J.A. Calton, thank you J.A., John Strange, thank you John, Zach High Leggett, thank you Zach, Carl Roberts, thank you Carl, and Thought Storms, thank you Thought Storms. Thank you so much to all of my patrons, however much you are pledging, however long you've been pledging. I could not do this without you. If you are not a patron and you'd like to support this channel, you can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives. Patrons who pledge $5 a month or more get shout outs at the end of Trek Actually, like those folks whose names I just read. And all patrons at all levels get to vote in polls to choose upcoming Trek Actually topics and submit questions early for my Ask Away Q&A live streams. I also want to remind you that in addition to making YouTube videos, I co-host a couple of podcasts alongside the brilliantly funny Jason Harding, including a Star Trek-themed comedy podcast called The Ensign's Log, which now also features the talents of the charming and wonderful Dana Cole. If you dig the Star Trek stuff I do on this channel, I think you will really like The Ensign's Log if you haven't listened to it already. We're nearing the end of our third season. It's a great time to jump on board with the show and to go back and catch up on what you've missed. Links to listen are in the description of this video. Check out the Ensign's Log. Now, The topic of next month's Regulation Trek Actually video has been chosen by my patrons who voted in the most recently completed poll. It's a topic I get asked about a lot, a topic that has been discussed among Star Trek fans for a long time, and a topic I actually touched on briefly in this video, so we're gonna come back to it and examine it a bit more thoroughly as we explore the question, is Captain Sisko actually a war criminal? That's next month. Thank you all so much for watching. Take care, everybody.